Episode 185, Mother's Brutal Revenge. "How could he be?" said Lester. He looked at Ken in a panic. Ken looked back at him with a smile. Lester couldn't help but tremble, and his brain buzzed. He had to react with caution. Mr. Drek had no reason to lie to him. Ken Stokes was the man. "Mr. Stokes, I'm sorry. I've offended you." Lester was so frightened that he knelt down. Although he had never met Ken, he had heard a lot about his deeds. Besides being courteous to people from all walks of life, he was even more daunting, as it was said that he held at least dozens of lives in his hands. And he had just been so rude to this man. If he got on Ken's bad side, the consequences would be unimaginable. Lester wanted to eliminate Ken's anger as quickly as possible, so kneeling down in front of him was his best idea. Huh? The other people were looking at each other. So, he hasn't met Ken? Why is he kneeling down all of a sudden? Is the man in front of him really Ken? The others thought. After the guests realized what had happened, their hearts began to pound, and their legs became weak. There were soft sighs around the room as nearly 100 people present started to kneel down in fear. "Mr. Stokes, I'm sorry. I didn't really know you. I've offended you. I'm no better than a pig or a dog," said Lester in a nervous voice while kneeling in front of him. Ken kicked Lester in the head. He screamed and fell to the ground. He quickly got up but knelt down again and continued. "Good fight. Yes, that was a good kick to my head." Ken snorted and went back to Flora. "What do you think we should do?" Her mood had calmed down. She stood up and walked over to Lester slowly. Lester's heart was beating more violently. Ken was respectful to this woman as if he were her subordinate. What is her status? He thought. As Lester knelt, he watched a pair of high-heeled shoes walking toward him. He heard the clicking footsteps, which made him shiver. "Look at me," Flora commanded. After hearing her voice, his heart leapt out of his throat. "Yes?" he replied in a panic and slowly lifted his head. When he saw her sneering face, he seemed to smile like a slave at his master. She grabbed his hair, touched his face, and slapped him mercilessly 6 times. She let go of him, and he felt his face burn and start to swell. A hot stream began to flow from his nostrils, which he wiped and saw that his hands were stained with blood. "Please forgive me. Please forgive me." He had been beaten and didn't dare to make this woman dissatisfied with him. He was still smiling and begging her to forgive him. The other people in the room also whispered for their forgiveness. "A bunch of idiots can't even figure out who they should be apologizing to. Do they want to live?" she said coldly. Without the strength of the Ambrose family, it was difficult to deal with 100 people at the same time. But if the family wanted to, it would not have been impossible. Lester was the first to react. He turned his head to Alex and said, "I'm sorry. I'm a fool. I'm nothing to you. Can you please forgive me?" "Yes, we're terrible people. Please forgive us." All the people there started apologizing. "I was wrong. It was me who had looked down on others with contempt," said Lester. "So, what do you think we should do to deal with these dogs?" Flora asked Alex as she turned to look at him. "I think they've scolded themselves enough. As long as they don't bother me again in the future, I don't think we need to do anything more," Alex said. This group of people had only looked down on him and mocked him a few times, so their harshness towards themselves was too much. In addition, Lester and Miriam, who had been fanning the flames, had been slapped hard on the face. Alex felt that what they owed him had been paid back, so there was no need to continue punishing them. "That won't do," Flora sighed. 7 years later, her son was still so generous. They had insulted him, and now he was just letting them off the hook. But she couldn't easily let go of their comments about his mother. She glanced at the dishes on the tables around the room and got an idea. She turned to the large group of people and said, "Everybody stand up, pick up your dishes off the table, and put them down on the ground." Lester and the group stood up and spent the next 2 minutes putting all the dishes from the tables onto the ground. Everyone lowered their heads in fear, as they didn't know what she was going to do next. She said, "You can eat your food off the ground, but you can't use forks or knives." There were sighs among the crowd, and someone muttered in a low voice, "How can I eat without cutlery?" Flora said with a proud smile, "I don't care how you eat it. You can eat it off your plate with your hands, or you can get down on the ground and lick it off, just so long as you eat all of your meal, and then you can go. You, take away all the cutlery from the tables. If they can't finish eating, they're not allowed to leave," she told Drek. "Yes, ma'am," he replied respectfully. He ordered the waiters to collect all the forks and knives off the tables. "Let's go," Flora said when she saw that everything was as she wanted it. Alex, Ken, and Drek followed her to the door. Alex glimpsed at Philippa, who was standing in the crowd with a frown on her face. He smiled faintly, walked over to her, and pulled her away from the group. He asked his mother, "Can we let this girl leave now?" "Okay, it's up to you." Flora thought that Alex intended to deal with her, so she didn't object. Thank you," Philippa repeatedly thanked Flora. She was overjoyed. She secretly looked at Alex and saw him smiling at her. She felt that he was so handsome at that moment that she couldn't help but smile back at him. After his mother had given Philippa permission to leave, Alex and Ken walked the young woman out. Flora then asked Drek to supervise the group that remained. She left with Alex and Ken and went to room 888. As soon as they walked into the room, Flora hugged Alex tightly. She called him son, and he called her mom. They both had tears in their eyes. They were just repeating the two words blindly and could not find any other words to express their inner feelings. The mother and son, who had been separated for 7 years, could hardly recognize each other. They had to wait until no outsider was present before they could talk to each other comfortably. Standing to one side, Ken couldn't help but turn his head away and wipe his tears with his hand. "Well, Alexei, let's not cry or let Mr. Stokes see this," she said to her son after holding him for a long time. She finally let go of him and wiped her tears. "I'm very glad to see mother and son reunite," said Ken with a faint smile. "Mr. Stokes, it's been a long time since we've seen each other," said Alex as he greeted him. "I didn't answer the phone before because the family doesn't allow subordinates to answer your calls. I hope you'll forgive me." He thought of Alex's several prior phone calls and felt very guilty about not having responded. "It's okay. I don't blame you," Alex said with a light smile. Flora asked Alex and Ken to sit down and eat with her. Alex had not been eating well these days, so he tucked into the delicious food. "Slow down. No one will take your food away from you." Flora couldn't help but feel sad as she watched her son eat. "Alexei, listen to your mother and give up looking for that Debbie girl," she said. if you give up looking for Debbie, you'll be able to restore your identity within the Ambrose family, and you won't have to suffer anymore. Alex shook his head slowly and said, I found her, but she refuses to recognize me. I want to be with her. Mom, I can't live without her. Hearing that Alex had found Debbie, Ken was stunned. Since the family had ordered him to stop looking for her, he had not taken any further action. Alex had unexpectedly found her using his own abilities. He felt that he had to report this to the rest of the family. Silly child, I heard that she's just a country girl. You should know that accepting such a background into our family is more difficult than trying to ascend into the heavens. Do you not want to Flora started to say, as she looked a little tense. She wanted to ask him if he didn't want to inherit the family properties. Realizing that Ken was still there, she closed her mouth. She just looked at Alex anxiously. Alex had been able to accept 7 years of poverty training in order to finally attain his position within the family. Now he was desperate to find this girl named Debbie. Isn't he setting up obstacles for himself? He might even lose his family rights, thought Ken. Mother, are you not from an ordinary family? Your family was different from the Ambrose family for sure. I want Debbie. I'll fight for her. When I was a child, did you not often say to me that you must grasp something you like with all your strength? Debbie is the one I want. You weren't lying to me, were you? Said Alex. Stinky boy, Flora laughed and scolded him. Seeing her son's indifference, she looked at him for a few seconds, sighed gently, and turned to Ken. Mr. Stokes, you see, Alexi's like this. I know that Alexi once spoke up for you on Harmony Island. Can't you really consider what I said to you earlier? Previously, she had asked Ken to secretly help Alex. However, he had been inflexible and refused. She could see that he was also very worried about her son's situation, and that he was trying to understand her feelings. This, murmured Ken. He was in a very difficult position. When he had seen the bad state her son was in, he had become equally distressed. However, he had received a firm order from the top echelons of the family, and he couldn't disobey it, especially as he was the person in charge of the East Coast Division. Mom, don't embarrass Mr. Stokes anymore. I'm living a full life now. You can rest assured that I'll get rid of this awkward situation, and you can have a daughter-in-law as soon as possible. Alex smiled, implying that the Ambrose family would accept Debbie and everything would be okay in the future.